Hello, everyone. Welcome to the broadcast. Really excited to have two preeminent scholars in the
Thank
field
you.
of education, Dr. Chapman and Dr. Wilkerson from University of Central Florida, or what we like to say is UCF. So,
Mhm.
looking forward to a great conversation. How are you both doing today?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. I'm excited about the conversation. Excited
I'm
to hear
doing,
the questions.
yeah, Larry, thank you so much, Dr. Walker, for talking with us today and doing as well as can be, considering that, we're in this new era of COVID-19. But those challenges don't mean as much as the opportunities to share the stories that we endeavor to share through the book we recently edited. So I'm happy to have this conversation.
Yeah, and I'm glad you added that because I think that what you've done here is provided what I describe as template for higher education, right? It's
Mhm.
a lot of discussion pre-COVID and post-COVID about the needs of underserved populations, particularly in post-secondary institution, and in the need for support or mentorship based on your book. So from student to scholar, right? So why don't you both unpack for the audience what was the history, what was the reasons why you decided to co-edit this book? Why is it important to you? And I think it's really important to hear that story.
Sure. Well, this book was conceptualized when Dr. Wilkerson and I were postdocs. We were sitting in a room, in fact, the very same room where I had defended my dissertation a few months before. And we were, just really trying to figure out the ins and outs of our postdoc experience, of publishing, and just our overall experience in academia. And we started to notice that the opportunities for research and publication and presentations were often dependent on the network that a student or a scholar had. And these opportunities, they determine your ability, your success, your ability to secure a job, your ability as junior faculty to earn tenure. And so they're really just dependent on who you gained favor with in the absence of formalized mentoring structures. So we wanted to really have a conversation about it because both of us had served as national officers for the Home Scholars program, and I can personally say that I accounted, much of my ability to complete my degree and enter a postdoc to that experience and to good mentoring that I received as a doctoral student. So that kind of gave us the idea to really look at how mentoring impacts trajectory and to use that lens to understand our own experiences and to provide a platform to elevate the experiences of others.
Yeah, so much like Deshaun, the idea behind the book really started out very personally. Um, I graduated from a historically Black college and university here in the state of Florida, and I credit Florida A&M University with really seeding into me the idea that I could do whatever I put my mind to, even if that meant being a faculty member. And at that time, I was imbued with professors who looked like me, who had similar interests that connected with mine. But when I went for my advanced graduate degree, the doctoral degree, that experience was very different and distinct from the one that I had at FAMU because I was at a PWI. So I entered the program knowing that I wanted to get my doctorate to ultimately follow the yellow brick road, if you will, road from faculty into university administrator, but didn't know how to get from that idea, that thought, and bring it into a reality. So, a part of the book is to speak to how do we support the purpose of dreams unwritten, unseen by scholars who have a desire to make a significant contribution to the field of education. And the other part is looking at just the empirical information that is available regarding faculty of color and administrators of color without getting into the nuance of the actual numbers or the data. I will say that it's very imperative that we really start to rethink and reframe our understanding of how to support faculty members so that they do get tenure, faculty members of color, that is, so that they are able to get tenure and that they're not going through a process preliminarily for 6, 7 years and then get into a point where they aren't. Currently, there have been some very interesting stories in higher education regarding this fact. And so I wanted to really start at the beginning of my career as a faculty member to talk about what I needed most. I talked about the fact that when I graduated with my doctorate, that I didn't have a job or a job prospect. And I really didn't have the mentoring to give me guidance or direction on how to pursue that next goal in life. That I went back home and I basically woke up every day to living with my parents. They're veteran teachers, and they were going to work and not being able to explain why I had spent a significant amount of my time earning this degree, but wasn't using the degree to fidelity, if you will. It wasn't until, as Dr. Chapman mentioned, that I gained the support of a senior administrator who basically just, asked me what I was doing. That one question
Mm.
changed the entire trajectory of my academic career. She asked me what I was doing, and I told her what I wanted to do. I didn't tell her what I wasn't doing. I didn't tell her I was jobless. I said, this is what I would like to do. And she gave to me a chance to kind of not prove myself, but support me. Many times in mentoring, I say mentors, and now kind of wrap things up and allow you to ask more questions. But mentors sometimes can be your tormentors. At least that's been my experience. They do one or two things. They try to influence you to be just like them and go through every experience that they had had, or they kind of, intimidate you in ways to get that good work out of you. She was really different. She sat down, she heard what I wanted to do, and she engaged me in a way where my experiences, my desires matter more. And we need to see more of this in higher education, particularly when it comes to scholars of color.
Yeah. Thank you both for that, overall, kind of backstory, right? Because I think that's really important. When we talk about in academia, it's the stories that matter and the experiences, particularly when we talk about, um, you know, Black people who were able to, make it through the pipeline, educational pipeline, and complete a terminal degree and end up at a post-secondary institution. And so I want to kind of connect some things. Both talked about the Home Scholars Program. UCF is one of the strongest, if not the strongest, Home Scholars Program in the United States in terms of mentoring graduate students, particularly Black graduate students, an extraordinary track record. But I want to, and you both talked about the importance of a mentorship. And obviously you use the word underrepresented when you talk about, the book and, this pipeline, this challenges in the academy. And I want to talk to something I think Dr. Wilkerson she touched on a little bit. And a few weeks ago, there was a hashtag, Black and Ivy, that, for, people who are watching this broadcast, probably many of them are familiar with it. If not, please go on Twitter and check it out, in which it really started off as, focusing on a Black male scholar at University of Virginia who was denied tenure, who done everything he was supposed to do, check all the boxes off, and was denied tenure. And then the fight by his wife, him, and other supporters to ensure that this process is, the university reviews it and really reverses the decision. But with that is why I'm trying to make this connection, is that a lot of Black scholars use that hashtag, was started by two Black women. Let me emphasize that because I think that's really important, by two Black women scholars. And then it became all these other Black scholars talking about their horrific experiences, quite frankly, in higher education. So the reason why I wanted to bring up that hashtag Black and Ivy is because you guys both, as academics, have talked about the challenges, right? So we talk about, and when I'm using your book as a lens, how can academics, whether it's administrators or faculty, senior faculty, how can they use your book to ensure that the experiences highlighting Black and Ivy don't happen?
So I think I'll start off by saying that, first of all, before they even touch the book, they have to have the mindset that Black people, African Americans, and I don't want to erase any minoritized segment of the population, um, earn and have the right to be in higher education. That it is not a special fraternal organization for people that just look like them, think like them, etc. And I can go on and on and on. But the reason why I think it's important is because the book can't be a band-aid to a mindset that is unwilling to be transformed about how we really invite and diversify the faculty in higher education. The other thing is that we separated the book chapters into three distinct areas. One, they would have the perspective of current doctoral students to understand what are their plights, hear their stories, to see what it is that we can work on or they can work on as students are going through the process of their dissertation process. I would tell you, in editing the book, it was painful to read some of the stories about people's dissertation process, how their chairs had been reassigned moments before their dissertation committee was supposed to meet and the student was supposed to go up for defense. And these stories end up being silent little secrets that we don't talk about, because at the end of the day, everyone, most of the authors in the book have graduated, earned those three stripes on their robes, and they're working in higher education. But I feel like we should eliminate those instances earlier on in the career of African American men and women who are in higher education. The other sections of the book were emerging scholars, meaning these are folks who are just entering into the field of education as professional. And many of their stories talked about how they're looking for alternative ways to be mentored. They have to do peer-to-peer mentoring because senior members, maybe within their departments, aren't really taking on the role to mentor. So beyond just having really approaching the book with this mind shift that I am going to be open to hearing the stories, after you have that sort of awakening, I would say that in the book, you'll see that we've tried to really incrementally tell the story about the necessity for mentoring and what it can do, and in some cases, what it doesn't do, how it harms and helps potential scholars.
The question you asked is really great because it's something that I grappled with myself in writing the conclusion. I think that our book did a really great job at elevating voices. And
Mhm.
when I thought about the format I would use for the conclusion, I had a couple of options, right? I could go with the traditional style that you might find in a peer-reviewed article where you make your recommendations, you talk about the implications. And while I did that a little bit, I think the context, people have to understand their context and they have to mentor within their context and they have to see their individual students and structure opportunities to support and develop them. So instead of writing the conclusion as a to-do list of what somebody can actually take and implement, I took the approach of trying to really elevate their voices and find some themes and summarize their thoughts. And scholars talked about being a student and working through isolation and
Mhm.
trepidation. They talked about support that they either got or did not receive in the area of scholarly development, professional socialization, advocacy. So I think the gem, the reason why our book is a gem is because it doesn't endeavor to tell these horror stories, right? Those are easy to come by, particularly if you follow the hashtag that you mentioned, but it tells of triumph as well as tribulations and does a really good job about elevating the voices of authors and showing the intersectionality of authors. So as Amanda mentioned, not wanting to leave out, any marginalized group, we have Black scholars, we have international scholars, we have scholars who are going through the junior faculty, their junior faculty journey or their doctoral journey as while working their doctoral by being part-time students. Some have families. So even though the scholars all represent an underrepresented group, they are very different. So we have multiple perspectives in the group. And as she mentioned, scholars at multiple stages in their journey. And so I don't see another publication that provides the depth that ours does in helping folks understand exactly what scholars are experiencing in scholar voice.
Oh, thank you both for that. So, I think you highlighted some of the points. Dr. Wilkerson, thank you for outlining kind of, the sections of the book, what they mean. And Dr. Chapman, you talk about voice. I think that's so important, right? And that's a key tenet of your book, right? Bringing voice to underserved groups, right? And what I think is also really interesting, I want to talk about you talked about intersectionality, right? And researchers, we talk about Kimberly Crenshaw and that phrase a lot. But as a Black male, I want to unpack the challenges, the lived experiences of Black women, and you've done that by co-editing this book. But can you talk a little bit for the audience about the unique experiences of being Black and female and trying to navigate this as it relates to navigate challenges as it relates to your book and overall the overall academy?
So I'll take a stab at it. One of the authors that I love recently, I've really been reading a lot of his work, is Thomas Paine. And in The Crisis, he wrote that these are the times that try men's souls. I feel that from my entry point into academia, I've been tried. Let me just put it that way. And it's not the problem. The problem isn't in, being challenged or tried. It's in not having support or not knowing how to localize support that's around me. So currently, you want to know what it's like for me. Sometimes it can be isolating, but rewarding. So I really operate from this weird sort of spectrum where things are happening at I guess the best way to put it is things are happening that I always envisioned for myself, but not with all the details that are going on. I work with a bunch of wonderful colleagues. You are one of them. And I have a great opportunity to kind of write with some of them. I've written with two people in our department so far, but there are times where I wish I can get guidance on like teaching approach, because we're now online and, working with students who challenge my authority. Let's be real, when it comes to doing work in a classroom, is quite unnerving because I put myself through such a rigorous process to, one, be able to stand in front of them as a faculty member, meaning I went through a committee process and they review my application and things of that nature, but also the academic preparation. And so sometimes it can be quite frustrating. The other thing, though, that I think about is my mom and my dad. I know that all that I am or ever hope to be is as a result of Dewey and Valerie Wilkerson. These are veteran educators, and when I think about where I'm at in education, I know it's because of them. They seeded in me the idea to love to read and to be involved in being an active learner in school. And I couldn't be here without them. Now, I say all that to say that for me, it's completely complicated to really experience this whole full experience of being a faculty member in higher education. What it's like, it's rewarding, but it does have its challenges at times.
Yeah, man, that's a tough one that I can honestly say that I thought more about what it means to be a Black scholar than what it means to be a female scholar. But I think in both situations, I have taken the cards that have given to me and pushed forward in any aspect that I can without really analyzing the details of the why, the how, the when, because I find that we can focus on those things and get caught up on the doors that are closed and what's not possible and not push forward with what we can do. Now, as far as experiences, I definitely know that my experiences, I feel, have been different from my white colleagues in just representation in different rooms, um, ideas about the community, particularly what's appropriate, what's important um, in teaching, interacting with white students, and just really all students, particularly over topics around diversity, can be quite challenging. Um, and as a woman, I juggle scholarship with being a wife and a mother. So I think that definitely all of those things impact my scholarship, but I also think that they fuel my scholarship. One of the best piece of advice that I got was from a mentor who talked about how it's important for scholars to nurture all aspects of their life, and that how for us those aspects fuel each other. And so I think that it's important to, whatever your intersectionalities are, find a balance. And I think that that balance gives you the strength to endure the opposition that you face in your work.
Yeah, thank you for that. You talked a little bit of being that's resilient, right? That's what we talk about. And the reason why I think it's important to pose that question is that, like you said, in terms of we in terms of being Black, but also I want to acknowledge is even though I'm moderating discussion that I realize the challenges that Black women encounter and in higher ed and other institutions are different than mine, right? So I think it's important. Like I said, we talked about the hashtag Black and Ivory, which was created by a Black woman. We use the phrase intersectionality. We talk about Kimberly Crenshaw, and whether we want to talk about, a lot of conversation about Black Lives Matter, right? Was an entity, was a word created by 3 Black women. So I just felt it was important that when we talk about elevating people's voices, to give you both an opportunity to kind of unpack that a bit. So thank you for that.
I want to add, before you ask the next question, that I'm really proud of this opportunity. The position I'm in now allows me to use my degree in a very practical way and work within a community that's historically African American. And it's great, I think, to be there as I am and to show up as I am, as a Black woman, to show, young girls that this too is possible for you.
Yeah, that's really important, right? Because we talked about in the very beginning that pipeline, because there are a lot of people who we're all, in America, everyone starts off pre-K, K, whatever, but not everyone, not only in terms of makes it through that pre-K through 12, took if you're Black in America or other underserved, marginalized populations, but even in terms of succeed where you both of you as scholars have. One of the things I want to ask you about is, Dr. Wilkerson, you made a comment earlier in our conversation about in terms of how people can use your book, and that, individuals, particularly individuals in post-secondary institutions, they have a certain, they need, in terms of some scaffolding, right? So they need to have bring something to the table. But let's talk a little bit about the folks who are interested in your book, and I'm talking about administrators or senior faculty, who some people, a lot of people think they have what they need. And I've got a certain orientation in terms of worldview, and I bring some things to the table, but they may not, right? So let's talk about those people who don't have that, and how can they benefit? So I'm talking about administrators and senior faculty. How can those individuals benefit from the book you guys co-editing?
The reason why I think it's a good question is because the folks that wrote endorsements for the books, the national president for the American Association for Colleges for Teacher Education, Dr. Lynn Gangoon, the campus president for a state college here in Florida, Dr. Felicia Williams, they're all administrators. And we had a dean from Florida A&M University who wrote a review as well. And I think that they saw the value in these stories, because oftentimes what ends up happening when we start talking about diversifying the field of education, particularly, or diversifying faculty, is when you ask a president or an administrator, they say, well, I don't select the faculty. That's the job of a committee. Instead of maybe looking across the university and saying, when are faculty of color selected for academic roles, and how many faculty of color do we have at the university, and how does this information support or not the goals and the mission that I have talked about or established? And when I say I, am talking about the administrator regarding our institution. I think what this book can do for administrators is really kind of hold their foot to the fire to help them get a up close view of what the experiences are of faculty of color, and really charge themselves with making a contribution to change it. One of the things that surprised me the most in the conversation you and I had was when you were looking at the breakdown faculty of color at our institution, a Research One, and you said, hey, did you know that you're the only Black woman that got hired as a faculty member the year that you got brought on? And for me, that wasn't a prize. It hit me like a ton of bricks. What are the expectations of being the only Black in 19 when I was brought on as a faculty member. Can I meet it? Other people come in, white women come in, and they may have peers that can support them. You mean to tell me in my first year that I'm the only one that looks like me that got hired in this role, and I'm at a metropolitan university? So it's not a slight against the university. It is to say that administrators can do more, and they must. And I think that the book provides them with the stories to motivate some action behind their sort of administrative charges for this. And then they have other administrators that back the book. So
One word: accountability.
Mhm.
In addition to having administrators who back the book, we have an administrator who was an author, who is an author. We also have a retired faculty member who is an author. And I think the
Mhm.
perspective that is very useful that they were able to provide is to say, hey, we know the policy structures that are in place for these colleges and these programs. We know that there are diversity and inclusion measures within them, but we know that there is a gap in accountability in how they are actualized. And so I think that what administrators and directors can get from our book is, really a call to action. You have these experiences and these voices. We've presented evidence that while these things are in place, you can't just say that they're there and that's good enough. You got to do the work. You've got to move mentoring past altruism. And here are some practical examples of people and programs who have done that. So you can no longer, turn a blind eye and say that you don't know.
well, and now that, since you mentioned that, Dr. Chapman, the other thing I want to point out is that many universities right now are recommitting themselves to supporting diverse individuals at their university. I know recently there's been this whole push of writing new statements coming from President's office about how Black lives are mattering. And the one question that I would put on the table is, does Black lives matter in the academy? If so, then what can we do to see these changes? One of the biggest critiques I think that I have of mentoring overall as a result of editing this book is that there's not a standardized way of mentoring. How I got mentored in the program or not, because I was not mentored throughout my doctoral process. I received mentoring really in as an early career professional, looks very different from how friends of mine who don't look like me got mentored, or how men get mentored. How some men will just go and meet people at a conference and establish a relationship. I was talking with another colleague of mine, and he said, "Oh yeah, I know Rich Milner." And I said, "How'd you meet him?" He's at X, Y, and Z University. I think he's at Vanderbilt. And he said, "Oh, I met him at a conference, and we just kept in touch." I mean, small things like that to help. And so when we talk about accountability, I think that we really have to look at how is this going to match up with the lip service that we're paying right now in higher education? If not, you'll just be accountable to basically saying something, being a part of a movement, but not really changing the trajectory on the mission of your universities. And that's important too.
Dr. Wilkerson, yeah, that's you both highlight some really key points I want to kind of go back on. So it sounds like you're talking about action with no work, action with no nothing, no connection, right? So Dr. Chapman used the word accountability, right? So it goes back to student and scholar. This important role that mentorship plays, particularly for groups who are, we talked about the Black and the Ivory. It's just not that percentage of us in these spaces is very small. And Dr. Wilkerson, I want to go back to a comment you made about the numbers. And I can remember one of texting you, looking at those numbers and saying, I don't want to traumatize her, but I was like, I kind of think she needs to know this, right? Because it's challenging, right? And go back to Dr. Chapman saying about accountability. Who do we hold accountable for that, right?
In many cases, we're not holding administrators accountable. We're not holding other faculty members accountable who don't look like us. The accountability almost rests solely on the individual who's coming in alone, a mentor, you know what I mean? And so the reason why I'm saying that is because I can sit here and give you package my words in a very nice way. But the reality is right now, truth in this era has a lot of value. So I'd rather speak truth to power and say that the accountability has traditionally been on the person who is either oppressed or underrepresented or a part of a vulnerable population. That it's on me to get X, Y, and Z done. Let's just say articles, for example, right? But then in what respect is those who are expecting me to get all this work done, how are they joining me in that process to make sure that it is being done? What I see oftentimes is that people put a carrot out in front of you and they expect you to get it, but won't tell you how to do it. You know, they'll tell you what needs to be done, but not how. And so I have to develop external support really to just be able to do some of the basic things. And that becomes problematic when you're on a clock, when you got 6 years, really less than that, to prove yourself academically. Now, I will say up front that thankfully right now that hasn't been my challenge, but also higher education is like sand right now shifting under our feet. I think the requirements for which I got brought in for are going to significantly change likely in the next year, right? We already know no travel. So I have to figure out how am I going to get those conferences and proposals in? And by the way, the university, you know, may or may not support those conferences that'll be online. So I think it's really important when we talk about accountability that we lay on the table that it's time for the accountability process to really show up on the other side of the table when it comes to those administrators and those who are working with populations like me, people who are part of the population like I am.
I want to add too, part of accountability is recognizing and shifting the culture. So I think that Amanda alluded to the experiences that were shared by authors who were first generation college students and doctoral students. And I think that no matter what ethnicity you are, you have common experiences if you're first generation. But think about how that's complicated when you're Black. Right. And you are, a doctoral student or you are junior faculty, you're trying to establish your research agenda. You're the only one that was hired by the university in 2019, right? So you're trying to establish partnerships even as junior faculty, or you're just trying to understand what research is as a doctoral student. And you're trying to marry your lived experiences with who you want to be in the academy. When looking at the research interests of a lot of our authors, it was deeply tied to who they are as people, their experiences in their community. So they're bringing these lived experiences to a place that you don't have a lot of faculty who understand that. And then even within the faculty that who do understand, could be limited, right? And a lot of times those relationships have to align with others' research interests too. So that, brings me to an experience I had early on in my doctoral journey, where I had a developing idea to look at the achievement gap, for example, and a professor just kind of shrugged her shoulders and said, well, you can look at that, but nobody ever solves it, right?
Wait. She needs to be specific. She was looking at, and correct me if I'm wrong, Deshawn,
Sure.
initially the achievement gap of African American students, for example. And basically that faculty member said what she said. And I thought to myself, like, as a person of color, as a Black woman, I'm not a person of color, let me stand in that Blackness.
Okay.
As a Black woman coming from Liberty City, Florida, where anytime you Google Miami, Black kids and education, you're going to see every reason why we aren't successful. But I made it out. Of course, my focus on research is going to be how can I ensure that my community is successful? So to hear from someone in the academy that will never get solved, it doesn't just stop me from not having a research focus. It really impacts me in so many different areas because that's attacking who I am as a person. I can't help my community is what I'm hearing.
And it made me wonder, do I belong here? And so that's another thing that a lot of the authors talked about is needing that validation, that
Sure.
yes, you have the skills to be here. This is for you too. You belong here. And that is something that, mentors can provide.
And I want to add too, Brother Larry, that every mentor doesn't have to look like me. So my mentor, and I have several of them, all but one is black. One is a white woman from the South who our lives couldn't be any similar if you put us in the same room, right? Then I have a white guy who's an outstanding scholar, worked at the University of Wisconsin. So just a very different life. But
Hmm.
what we're able to connect on is they have centered their support around helping Amanda, right? And not helping Black Amanda or junior colleague Amanda. It's about helping them, and I think that's what we need to focus our attention on. One, that support can look like anything, which I think on the receiving side, we all know that. I think sometimes people go, oh, she's Black, maybe we should find a Black person for her, right?
Absolutely do.
Instead of saying, gosh, she's passionate, she's knowledgeable about this, let's see who else we can connect her to. So it's very important to say that the mentor doesn't necessarily have to look like me. But again, I'm gonna go back to something that I mentioned earlier, is that the mentor doesn't need to be a tour mentor, and that's what we want to avoid.
Yeah, thank you for both for sharing that. There are a couple things I want to highlight that I think you collectively talked about, and I want to go back to Dr. Chapman a while ago. You talked about culture, right?
Mhm.
And then we talked about these lived experiences, right? And in terms of who in terms of a scholar, Black scholars, and other scholars from different backgrounds, you are a culmination of your experiences, right? And that's what and that has value. So, but sometimes that's not valued, but it has capital, has substance to it. It's real. Um, so I want to talk a little bit about you. Kind of you both got to it. You about to steal my thunder, and I was a little worried about my next question, but you didn't quite steal it. But
Good.
Dean Carroll and Dr. Hop, right? Both of those um, academics have played, senior scholars have played important roles in your life. And I don't want to leave this conversation, but we talked about that key mentorship piece, and we've kind of alluded to, and we talked about the importance of mentorship. But if you could both can unpack for the audience a little bit about their important role in your life as mentors.
In the conclusion, I open up by talking about the first time I saw Dr. Hop. And it's important because it speaks to representation, right? So I'm in a master's level class. Not excited about the start of the new semester because I'm on this urban track program. I've had maybe one Black teacher on the whole track. So here I am feeling a little bit exhausted
Right.
about, talking about this topic with people who may or may not be able to relate outside of scholarship. And so then in walks Dr. Hop. And for the first time, I saw who I could be in education.
Mm.
And that was absolutely transformative to me. We developed a natural connection through the master's program. She encouraged me to pursue my doctoral degree, which I fought for quite a while. But her message was quite simply your voice as a woman, your voice as a Black person is incredibly valuable. It would take a whole nother interview for me to really unpack all of the things that Dr. Hop has taught me, shown me, the way she's advocated for me. But I think one of the things in particular is that she saw me. So for me, being a first generation student played a heavy role. My parents were my first mentors, and prior to Dr. Hop, my only mentors. They taught me everything about life, about faith and education. Those were their two pillars, faith and education. But it came to a point where it wasn't enough. I didn't have the social capital that I needed to move forward and reach those goals. And so feeling a little bit foreign, I think, in the master's degree program and a little bit in the doctoral program, I didn't know how to advocate for myself. And that is a major theme in our book, is helping scholars develop social capital and helping scholars learn how to advocate for themselves, and also advocating for the scholars. But being new in that environment, you don't know what you don't know. And
Mhm.
so what was very valuable, one of the most valuable things I think about my experience with Dr. Hop, is somehow she was able to pick up on that and pinpoint those things that I needed, and to draw things out of me that I did not even know that were in me. And a lot of times the onus is on the student to pursue those opportunities and to, find those mentors. But if you're like me, you might not know how to do that. And so she definitely found me. And I think that mentors need a critical eye that to be able to identify those students and to pull those things out. When I had the experience that I talked about previously, where I had an unsupportive faculty member, Dr. Hop was the one who came alongside me when my idea about the achievement gap was a little bit primitive, and through research, through scholarship, through development, helped to grow that idea into what became my dissertation topic and my line of research. And I think that's another critical component that mentors have to be able to do. I don't expect faculty members to be the number one mentor of every student who walks in their class, right? That's exhausting. It's not possible. But I do think that we can all not shut students down with their ideas, but help them make connections and help them
Mhm.
develop those ideas. And I think that's one of the things she was able to do at a time when I needed it most.
So, uh, Dr. Carroll is a little different. I think that she's really a master teacher, if you will. She really helped me gain a better understanding of the larger purpose of academic work, all while developing me professionally and personally, if I can just be honest with you. Um, One of the things that I would do is I would run into her office because I actually worked as her postdoc for a couple of years. And I would have these great ideas. And she would use a strategy that I, I, I kind of hate, but it pulls, I do. Uh, but it pulls out, it forces me to make sure that what I'm doing is solidly grounded in connecting to some outcome that I'm trying to achieve, which is she asked a million questions. So I grew up where, I could go and say, Mom, I'm gonna take over the world. And she'd be like, I support you. You're gonna do it, baby. And I could go in Dean Carroll's office and say, Dean Carroll, I'm gonna do X, Y, and Z. And she'd be like, okay, well, what about this and that? Did you think about this? Have you thought about X, Y, and Z? And I would be like, gosh, why, be proud of me. Stop asking me all of these questions. But what it would do is it would really force me to kind of use the same format or approach before I would go to her. And I would say, okay, let me start questioning this idea. This is what I plan to do. This is what I want the outcome to be. But how, am I really making that connection? Like I'm saying that I want to do X, Y, and Z. The other thing that I thought was profoundly interesting about her is she never made me feel like I couldn't do it.
Mhm.
The first time I went to AERA, she encouraged me to go. Now, I've been a doctoral student for 3 years. And she said, what conferences are you going to? And I said, eh. And she said, oh, you have to go to AERA. It was in New York. And I went to New York. I literally could only fly in for a day and leave because it was so expensive. That one trip changed everything. I met Chance Lewis, Dr. Chance Lewis, professor at the University of North Carolina, Charlotte. And I was explaining to him, like, I really want to do more writing. And he said, well, why don't you work with me on this journal that I do? And it's specifically to help, emerging scholars. And I was a guest editor on it, and reading other people's work improved the way I even, would approach writing. But that was because she said it to me, what conferences are you going to? And then she would support me in going to these conferences. So she's just a teacher, and it always feels like I'm going to learn something when
Mhm.
I go to her. And I can improve whatever I'm working on because now I have adopted this sort of teacher mentality that makes me self-reliant, but also useful for any work that I'm doing. Where I question a lot of what I'm doing without just saying this is a great idea, because I know how to package a really bad idea and make it look good. But she's forced me to question, like, how are you meeting the intended goals of what you're doing? And I haven't had a teacher like that in higher education since I left FAMU.
Wow. Thank you both for sharing that. Now, I know we could probably be on this broadcast talking for hours on end about a variety of topics including your excellent book. But I want to bring things to a close here and kind of review, obviously, student scholar, you talked about voice, we talked about culture, obviously the importance of mentorship and valuing the lived experiences of Black, Brown, and other marginalized populations. And also, obviously, the importance of making sure, higher education officials and faculty members value experiences and want to support junior faculty. So I just want to kind of leave, a parting, shot, so to speak, for you both, and just quick summary and some thoughts, some final thoughts you want to leave the individuals who are watching this broadcast, starting with Dr. Chapman and then moving on to Dr. Wilkerson. Any final thoughts on your book, your how you navigate and even where you are today?
I think, starting with the book, I think this book is so incredibly important because particularly during this time, earlier, Amanda alluded, and you as well, Larry, alluded to the statistics about Black people, Black women in higher education. And given that this country is at a place to look at our past, look at systemic racism, look at, policies, and going back to racism, I was in a conversation the other day explaining that for me in this position, it's not about person to person. I'm looking at systems here. I'm looking at
Mhm.
policies, how people are marginalized by policies. And I think that there's a role for everyone to play in that. But I think there's a particular role for those of us who have the research acumen to do it and contribute to those conversations. I think it's important for us to do it inside of the academy, but also important for us to move outside of the academy and use the knowledge and the voice that we have in other realms. And I just want to push education. I want to push graduate degrees in a time where people are saying, you don't need a degree, just go get a certificate. That's fine for some, but there is still a need for those of us to be present, to bring our experiences to academia and to use those to influence policies that impact our communities, but also policies within the ivory tower. It's not enough for us to earn these degrees and then just sit and say, we've got our degree, or we've got tenure, or we've earned this administrative position. We have to do the systemic work to open the doors for other people. And I think that by lending their voice to this work, and being vulnerable in that, I think that our authors are highlighting the importance of it and taking those first steps to make that happen. So I want to thank you for facilitating this conversation with us today. And I just really hope that, students, faculty, and administrators pick up the book, read it for what it is, but also think about how your context, whether it's urban, whether it's rural, whether you're looking at Black people, whether you're looking at Latinx people, how can you understand the lived experiences of people and move mentoring past altruism and create some formalized structures? I conclude the chapter in the book by referencing King, where he says, where do we go from here? And in that book, he says that, you know, just laws or policies that are loosely enforced, they create chaos instead of providing structure if we don't hold ourselves to achieving, to putting enough structure into achieving the outcomes that we need for change. So I hope that that's something that administrators latch onto and use this book as a template for what can be.
So I would say that this book was a labor of love, and sometimes not, because it was like a 2-year process. And one of the things that I would hope that viewers would gain from reading the book is that there needs to be a stronger link between the aspirational goals that we have regarding, you know, a diversified, inclusive higher education faculty and staff members and professional support staff. There needs to be a really strong link between those aspirational ideas and the real occurrences that are happening on the ground. I still think it's very imperative for educators to really think, and eminent leaders to think about this, but also provide some real solutions. And I think we talk about some of that in the book. And then I think it's very important that we communicate with scholars who are either doctoral students or emerging scholars, that they can be strengthened by reading the stories of others who come before them and know that there is a way forward. I think I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge that it's been uh, rewarding to work with someone who was in the trenches with me, going through their doctor. We got, Deshaun and I got our degrees at the same time, and this work couldn't be done alone. It took a joint effort, but also it's important for the field and the profession to really recognize that we endeavored to write this not to just call people out and let it be another way of lambasting people, but the purpose behind it was to say that people are really motivated by the idea that they can transition from student to scholar, and that we'd like to see their support. Finally, I would just add, because I think that Deshaun was brilliant in talking about, you know, what it is that we wanted to cover in the book. I started out by talking about Thomas Paine and his quote. But if I had to end this discussion, I would just say to all of the folks that are viewing this that, you know, remember the words of Frederick Douglass, who he eloquently wrote that there can be no success without any struggles, but we don't intend for your struggles to stop you. We want you to learn from them. So again, thank you, Larry, for having this conversation with us today. And I hope that it will be inspiration as well as fuel for those who will view this broadcast.
Well, thank you both for, you know, those great synopses. I think that this has been a really important broadcast in terms of, you know, to really get you, people can see the authentic, in terms of how you both are authentic and real, and offer some, you know, really some personal narratives that, you know, will help some people watching this broadcast, help them continue along in their path. So I want to thank you both for all your hard work. Recognize your you know, extraordinary effort in putting together this project. Wish you all the very best and look forward to collaborating in the future.
Yay!
So